All right, good morning, everyone. This is the Wednesday, July 17th, 2024 meeting of the Dunn County Planning Resource and Development Committee. Looks like all members of the committee are present except Supervisor Bjork, who is excused. Approval of the minutes from July 3rd. Do you have a motion?
I'll move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I know we have one correction, which is that Monica actually was excused, and I think she's just down as absent. So if we could make that
Oops.
correction. Anything else? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Minutes are approved. Do you have any public comments today? Come in. Okay. No comments. We have no public hearing. Staff reports. Register the Deeds monthly report. Heather.
Good morning. Nothing to add unless there's questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Heather, I noticed it said just way down the bottom of a paragraph, like you're trying to hide it. It says elected president of Wisconsin Register of Deeds Association. Well, way to go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a yeah, it's kind of a 5 years, you start out as third VP and you work your way through. So it's a 5-year process, but it's a year-long commitment as president.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. Any other questions? Okay. Yanis. Mr. Carlson.
Good morning, everyone. My report is up for everybody to see on the screen here. I don't have anything additional unless there's any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Carlson?
Things are still very busy. Just yesterday alone, I received 5 certified survey maps for review in one day. So, which
Wow.
is
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah. So.
Okay. And
I'm not awake this morning. Yeah, I guess I had quite a bit to report this month. A lot of things going on in our office. We did actually hire someone and they will be starting July 29th. I guess I don't know how much in detail I should go into that yet, but we're really excited to get her on board, and I'm really hopeful for what that will do for our office. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, I can do them.
any questions? Supervisor Morehouse.
Mr. Chairman, how does the Board of Adjustment meet when it's got 3 vacancies?
So to have
Four,
a quorum,
well.
yeah.
But the alternates don't.
Yeah, it's pretty bare bones right now. So 3 makes a quorum. So if those 3 can actually make it to the meeting, we can proceed. And I do believe that Chairperson Kelly McCullough has found maybe a couple people that he's reached out
Okay.
to. I haven't heard back what their status is, but
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Ann. Chase, Land and Water Conservation.
Good morning, everyone. My report was in the packet. I don't have a whole lot to add to it. Several things in there you've already been discussed through this committee and through county board in a couple of them. So I guess if you have any questions, the big thing right now is we're doing the private well monitoring program again. So our intern Kaden is doing a really good job this year and out there knocking on doors. So be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? All right. Thanks, everybody. Good work as always. Um, Item 7, at my request, 2 items. Review standards for accessory dwelling units. And my intention here was that we would just have give ourselves an opportunity to sort of consider whether or not there are, what the standards are that are in there that we want to use, and if there are anything oversight that we might have basically in response to the concerns raised at the last board meeting. Anne, have you had a chance to look at this at all and think about them? No?
I think about this every day,
Oh,
every
good.
night. It just doesn't go away. So I have had a few supervisors reach out to me with questions, and I think I've been able to answer them really well. Really good questions. I'm hoping that some of them actually ask them again, just so the full board can hear the question and the answer. I guess I'm still feeling really comfortable with everything that we're doing. Um, I really want to emphasize too that I don't think that this is the drastic change in like residential density that people are concerned about. R2, R3, and GA already allow for duplexes, so that would be 2 units on one piece of land. Um, Obviously, GA, there's an exception for that for only certain people, but um, I do think this is relatively straightforward. I think we have enough standards that would keep things going. I think it's looking good. But honestly, I would love if people reached out to me more, especially giving me a chance to respond in writing, because then I can really think it through.
Okay.
Um,
Would you be willing to share with us some of the concerns?
Sure, yeah. Monica was one. Can I share yours? Okay. I'm just gonna bring up my email. Just take me a second here. The silence is killing me right now. I'm so sorry.
Put the pressure
All
on.
right.
No, we have plenty of time.
I'm just gonna read the full, pretty much just get to the point here. So I have a question related to the proposal that some have floated regarding parallel town approval for ADUs and GA via special exceptions. My recollection from last month's county board meeting is that the cost to apply for a special exception is $800, whereas the cost for a permit for a permitted use is $200. My question is this: in your professional experience and opinion, would that additional $600 fully cover the additional cost that the county would incur throughout the entire process of reviewing and granting the special exception? I'm thinking about the extra staff time to create reports, attend the BOA meeting, notice the public hearing, communicate with the applicants and towns, and any other related expenses. I know these can vary from case to case, so I'd be thinking about a typical uncomplicated case. All right, so I responded, I've been evaluating our permit fees to determine if they're due for reconsideration. The last assessment was conducted in 2020, and since then, the cost of basic goods and services, including fuel and vehicles, has risen significantly. The costs incurred in processing even relatively routine or uncomplicated special exception permits is likely to exceed the $800 permit fee. As I mentioned previously, this is another reason I believe an evaluation of our permits and fees is necessary. So essentially, I kind of did the math really quickly. I'd already been thinking that this was going on, but basic math, the average cost of a public hearing notice is about $125, $150. So there's 2 insertions that are required for a public hearing. The amount of staff time that goes into facilitating these meetings, I mean, we're putting together everything. We're doing the agendas, the notices, we're writing staff reports, we're assembling packets, we're putting things on the website. Staff are going out to the site and taking photos. We're working with the applicant to get all the information we need. You know, it's a lot of work. Even these ones that are relatively, she said, just kind of easy and just kind of a straightforward. We have a lot of those ones where people are applying for a non-farm residential parcel. These are so routine. We go through them over and over again, but they still, I mean, that time still does add up. So I would say they're either breaking even or they're over right now. But again, those fees just need to be looked at anyway. And then I can find that other one if you'd like me to continue.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. This one is from Supervisor Ann Vogel. And I think, Tom, you were also included on this reply. Were you? Okay. I know there was a few questions, so I'll try to, I don't know. She's just following up from some of the questions that were asked actually during the supervisors meeting. How are the towns involved in the current building permitting process? Actually, I just lost my place, sorry. So in Dunn County, the building permitting process involves the county and the towns, each with distinct responsibilities. So all but 6 of the 22 towns in Dunn County have adopted county zoning. So that means our office is responsible for administering the zoning ordinance and issuing zoning permits for those 16 towns. The town is responsible for uniform dwelling code. So this is essentially just building standards for 1 and 2 family dwellings. But dwellings with 3 or more units have to follow commercial building code, and there is a commercial building inspector when that is the case. So most towns hire a building inspector to issue the building permits and certificates of occupancy. Town recommendations, special permits such as conditional uses, special exceptions require town input, but the Zoning Board of Adjustment is tasked with hearing and actually making the decision for these permits. Applicants for these permits are advised to meet with the town board first to present their application. Towns can then provide recommendations and suggest conditions of approval to be added to the conditional use permit. These conditions help address any concerns regarding public health, safety, and welfare. So her next question is, so how is the process for an ADU different? An ADU is secondary housing unit on a single family residential lot. The process for obtaining permits for an ADU would be similar to that of the primary dwelling, particularly in terms of town notifications and the sequence of permits. However, the proposed zoning ordinance changes have additional standards for approval of ADUs. These standards are included in the proposed ordinance change documents. I've summarized them below. Would you like me to read it? Okay.
Sure.
No more than 1 ADU is permitted per lot or parcel. Fees are the same as those required for a single-family dwelling. ADUs must meet development standards applicable to principal structures in their respective zoning district. This includes setbacks, setback reduction, lot coverage, and height regulations. ADUs may not be constructed on the same lot or parcel as a duplex or multifamily dwelling. ADUs must be smaller in size than the single-family dwelling, and in no case shall they be greater than 1,200 square feet. The distance between the primary single-family dwelling and the ADU cannot be more than 300 linear feet. For lots with an area less than 1 acre, the applicant may be required to demonstrate that the lot has sufficient area for a replacement septic system. ADUs must comply with building and safety codes applicable to habitable structures. ADUs can't be sold separately from the rest of the property unless the subdivision meets town and county land division regulations. And prior to zoning permit issuance, the landowner must record a deed restriction that prohibits the conversion of the property to a condominium and prohibits subdivision of the ADU unless it meets land division requirements. So essentially, the permits for an ADU involve both county and town approvals. It's similar to what you would go through for your normal single-family home. but they would need to be more restrictive standards than the home would. The landowner can apply for necessary building permits from the town, and both approvals are necessary to ensure that the ADU complies with regulations. Next question, why would the town want to veto an ADU, and wouldn't those standards in the ordinance, wouldn't those standards be in the ordinance at the county? So is this a trust issue? And I said, the towns might have concerns about ADUs for several reasons. Infrastructure strain, increased density from ADUs might strain local infrastructure such as roads, sewage, and water systems. Towns might be concerned that the character of existing neighborhoods could be changed, leading to higher density than the town intended. One of the concerns brought up at the ADU, as the PRND worked on the proposed ADU standards, was that the residential 1 zoning district was intended for single-family homes. When they made decisions regarding zoning district designations, they generally used R1 for smaller lots in areas they intended for single-family home development. They didn't anticipate ADUs and seemed to feel that ADUs would circumvent their intentions for single-family neighborhoods. For this reason, the PRND removed ADUs as an option in R1 zoning districts. Towns are responsible for ensuring that any new construction does not negatively impact public health, safety, and welfare. They might feel an ADU could lead to increased traffic or safety issues. Towns implement building codes and may have additional ordinances such as mobile home ordinances, nuisance and junk, land division that address more specific local concerns. These might not always be fully covered by county ordinances. While it might not always be a trust issue, towns and counties need to ensure that their respective regulations and standards are being met. Coordination and communication are key to preventing misunderstandings or overlooked regulations. If a town disagrees with a county zoning decision, it doesn't have the power to veto it directly. Instead, they need to appeal the decisions to the zoning board or to the circuit court, and that can resolve the issue. So to summarize, the county role is setting zoning regulations and issuing zoning permits. The town's role is to ensure compliance with building codes and issuing building permits. Town concerns may stem from local impacts, ensuring or specific local standards, coordination and trust, effective communication between county and town authorities is essential to align on standards and prevent conflicts. And the appeals process, towns can appeal zoning decisions through established legal channels, but cannot directly veto county decisions. Next question. The county wouldn't approve an ADU where the well wasn't up to snuff and it would drain the aquifer, or if the septic couldn't handle more people than modifications, or an additional system would be required, right? Certainly, the county follows strict regulations to ensure public health when permitting dwellings. We look at water supply, wastewater management, environmental impact. And I brought up that there was a proposed standard to address this, and that's the one for the lots with an area of less than 1 acre. They would have to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the environmental services there's sufficient area for accommodating it. Next question, I guess I don't understand how a driveway with an extra car or 2 would be grounds to veto an ADU. And I said, I understand the concern raised regarding driveway access and parking in relation to ADUs. It's important to clarify the regulations and considerations. The Dunn County Land Division Ordinance stipulates that no more than 4 lots or outlots or a combination thereof may be accessed by a private road or access easement. This regulation ensures that private roads maintain a manageable level of traffic and are capable of safely accommodating vehicular access to multiple properties. As far as parking, in many cases, the parking needs for ADUs are addressed within the existing driveway. This is in accordance with county zoning regulations that aim to manage parking. And I said there may be a misunderstanding regarding the correlation between additional cars and the grounds for vetoing an ADU. Zoning regulations and ordinances are designed to balance the needs of property owners with the considerations for neighborhood character. And And then I do go into kind of some of the current proposed zoning rules, just to kind of make that a little more clear, but I need to take a, and maybe you guys do too.
Uh, any follow-up on that from the committee? Diane?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I have been saying this for all of the months that we've been discussing this. I think the standards are appropriate. I think they're rigorous. I think they should address virtually all concerns that zoning can address. I mean, there are attitude issues and so on that we certainly have no control over, but I think the standards protect the interests of the homeowners, of the resident, of the owner of the ADU, of the county and the towns. I am happy with what we've done here. I don't see any reason to add an additional layer of approval. I think we've done it appropriately.
Okay, anyone else?
I agree. I agree with Diane, but I am wondering what the implications would be if the implications of this proposal for a parallel authority. So that change would be sort of a global change that would affect all special exceptions. Is that correct? Yeah, so that's a much more global issue than just this. So that would be a pretty significant change. All right, I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, and my thought is that we may decide as a committee that and with staff input, that it makes sense to review the special exception provisions of our ordinances. We've talked about that a little bit already, but that is a separate issue, kind of. Or it by tying it to this without adequate time to review it and study it could cause more problems than it solves. Given the tenor of I don't know what's going to happen at the board meeting. I would expect that. Let me ask that if without objection, if I see that we have some town board, are there any comments you would like to make? If you do, could you come up and Gene? I don't want to get into a lengthy just back and forth, but name and address too, I think, Jim, just to.
Yeah, I guess our wish to go on the special exceptions is so that the ADUs could be evaluated with respect to our comprehensive plan. And that as a permitted use, there is no such evaluation. And that there's been articles in a number of papers and Wall Street journals, and I've actually gotten circulars sent to me from different groups that have talked about how good they are and that they promote things like recreational use of properties where they can do short-term rentals and that. And we as a rural community have seen a number of outside investors come in and buy up lands and do things that are permitted, but not necessarily in character with the comprehensive plan for our community. So, so as a special exception, we get to address things like does it affect does it have adverse effect on property values? Does it affect nuisance issues, such as noise, dust, smoke, odor, or whatever? So that's why and there is not as much history in terms of rural ADUs as there is for municipal ADUs. There's quite a bit of, there are quite a few communities that have ADUs in them, cities and villages and such. And, you know, that's, and even there, it sometimes causes issues, but that's, so that's where we would like to be able to evaluate its use and make sure that its use is in compliance with our comprehensive plan, so that you know, it's not like it would prevent ADUs in the communities. And you know, we think ADUs are great, but we just want to make sure that they are compatible with our communities and get implemented that way. Because if they're permitted, you know, it's like your building permit. If it complies with the Universal Building Code, it gets permitted. There is no adjustment that can be made to make sure that it would have any adverse effects on the community. I mean, you know, the building inspector doesn't have that provision, nor does zoning. You know, zoning doesn't look to see how compatible it is with the comprehensive plan. So that's, but under special exceptions, the Board of Adjustment does. And so, and it would take input from the towns. And as you correctly identified, the parallel use thing is a separate issue. And indeed, the towns are working on petitioning the county board to make that change. But that is a separate issue. But it came up with respect to this because there was suggestion that if we had special exception, that the towns really still wouldn't have any control over. So anyways, so that's.
Okay. Thanks, Gene.
May I follow up?
Yeah,
So if it were just added as a special exception, that wouldn't be enough to grant the kind of oversight that is being asked for, that it would need to also include the parallel authority. Is that correct?
great. Yes, I think maybe I hate to put you on the spot, Christian, but could you sort of
Yeah.
share your thoughts on this?
If it's just a special exception, then it goes to the Board of Adjustments and Ann does all her prep work, which includes reaching out to the towns to get their input, which then the board will see and typically considers pretty heavily. But there would be no standalone town veto power or anything like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, man. You want name and all that, or
Yeah, I want to just,
Bob Cook, Town of Red Cedar Chairman, E6477, 490th Avenue. In the discussion here today, we talked about, or you talked about, town's ability to put input into permitted ADU. Isn't that what you said? You were going over the setbacks. It's the same as a house as far as from the road. So who would the permit come from? The zoning office for an ADU?
So the zoning permit, just for the use of the land, would come from our office. The building permit would come from your building inspector.
So if they wanted to put an ADU up and they came to your office and got a permit,
Mhm.
what would the cost for that be?
So right now, I believe it'd be $200.
Okay. And at what point would the town be notified that an ADU is being planned?
So right now, when we do a zoning permit, we carbon copy or electronic copy the town clerk on the zoning permit letter,
Okay.
and we send that placard over. The building inspector is also included on that. So it goes to the town clerk and the town's building inspector so that they're aware that a permit was issued from the county. So with a home, we don't really follow up, is a building inspector going to see this or not typically? We just send it to him. He sees that we issued a zoning permit and he proceeds with his process. However, with an ADU, one of the standards that we are proposing is that they need to get that certificate of occupancy or we can revoke our permit as well. So we're making sure that when we issue this, there's still follow-up, that it's inspected properly for uniform dwelling code and that it's habitable, essentially.
When they come to you to get a permit for an ADU, are they bringing a map showing where it's gonna go to your office?
Yep. So there's a site plan that's included in our
Yeah.
zoning permit application that they have to draw in where it is and then indicate all the setbacks as well.
Well, I think a lot of our concerns would go away with just a conversation between the towns and zoning at that moment. Because it's more than likely, we aren't aware of a house being built or an ADU going in. We get the notification from you to the clerk, but as far as the building inspector, and maybe that's our problem only, we get very little notification as far as process, what stage they're in. It's like they're in charge of it, and they'll tell us what we need to hear when they're good and ready. But if there was a question on whether or not this was suitable for an ADU, perhaps due to some things that the town saw, it would be very helpful to know that right up front, talking to you.
Can you give me an example of what would be like an unsuitable situation potentially?
Possibly a change in agricultural procedures in a rural community. Farm with an expansion of a dairy herd.
Mhm.
Sights, smells, sounds may not be the best place to have an ADU put up. The original owner, tolerated it for years and years. I can't come up with a good scenario for that. But if we were made aware of it much sooner, and we talked about the possibilities of what's good here, what's not good, I think it would be much more harmonious.
Is it okay if I ask a follow-up question?
Please.
So if someone was proposing to build a regular home near like a CAFO, would the town be opposed to that?
Not necessarily opposed, as concerned that, are you the homeowner aware of what's going on? Because what we tend to see a lot of now is people from the city or other locations moving into rural areas, not realizing that at combining time, there could be tractors and wagons, semi trucks and combines running till the wee hours of the morning, and they get upset with the sound, the sight, the lights in the sky. And when it's time to pump manure pits or farmers hauling manure out of a loafing shed, these are the complaints that we deal with every spring and every fall. We want to make the homeowner aware that you might be bringing in an elderly person that really doesn't want to be involved in that type of circumstance.
So I have two follow-ups if that's okay. So the first one is that I believe there is a town in Dunn County, and maybe Tom can help me answer this, that when there is a certified survey map, when a lot is created, they actually have a something written on the CSM, on the face of the CSM that lets them know about that agricultural nature. Could you add to that, Tom?
Yes, I believe it's Elk Mound. There's several towns that have a standard phrase that they have on there: extended hours of operation, dust, smells,
I think
other
Painter
in-
does.
other inconveniences. And when those arise and there's, oh, I forget the terminology they use, but something about, agricultural uses shall be favored and considered a benefit to the town and shall not be considered a nuisance or something. I forget the exact verbiage, but yeah, there's a standard phrase they have on there. Now, whether or not people read that, that's another thing, right? But
You're exactly right. And I believe the town of Tainter has that on their website that, you know, it's a rural community and we expressly protect the right to farm. But I think it's been going pretty well with your office right now, Ann. And I think that if we were notified, you know, as soon as someone considers something like that, if we could talk, I think a lot of these concerns would go away. That's all I have. Thank you for putting up with me.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody have any questions of? Yeah. And
I just had one more thing that I wanted to add to that other part was that I think we need to keep in mind that these ADUs are going onto an existing property of an existing homeowner. So I think Bob's totally correct in that that is like a really common thing that people complain about, that when they move here, they don't understand. But to be fair, ADUs would be in addition to a home that's already there. So I think there should be a little more understanding of what's currently going on, but there's always exceptions, especially when people are new to the area. I would not be opposed to having kind of a system where when we get that zoning permit application, we send that to the town right away before we even issue a
Yep.
zoning permit. I mean, we could add that
that's an
extra step.
internal
Yeah,
process we
it
could
would-
add.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that difficult. And I do feel like our office right now, we kind of do try to do things like that.
Yep.
When we get something that we're questioning, we'll reach out to the building inspector or we'll try to reach out to the town clerk. But that's how my staff and I are running the office. If there's a turnover, I can't guarantee that. So, right now I say we could definitely make that, a guideline or a policy within our office to send that to the towns right away. I think that's an excellent idea.
A lot of this conversation sort of revolves around an assumption that someone who's never been in the area, someone who's new to the area, someone who is disconnected from the principal homeowner is going to be moving into an ADU. And that's simply not the case in all of the research that we've looked at over, the last year. I mean, these are, generally speaking, family members who are definitely aware of the previous uses of the property and would suspect understanding of those uses. So it's not as if we're inviting a whole bunch of external strangers to a community. They're likely family members. So I think some of those concerns are sort of obviated from the start. At least I think so.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Well, they could be family members, but my family members came from the city. So if I had an ADU out in the country and I bring my family members in, they would have no idea of it. And eventually it's not going to be family members. It's going to be rented out to other kinds of people and they'll still get the complaints. But the main thing that I really liked what Bob said was the communication. I think any committee could sit here and say, we need better communication. Any family could say that, husband and wife could say that. So, Ann, I like that idea where the more communication, the better.
Okay, anything else?
I think there's something I kind of wanted to add. And I think this might be my last chance to say it, just so it's out
Sure.
into the open, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what can you currently do as far as residential density and what's being proposed with these ADUs and what that actually means. If you wouldn't mind me reading this
please do.
response. Okay. I know it's getting a little dry, but so the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance would allow ADUs in R2, R3, and GA. And then I want to just go over how this would impact each zoning district. Or this is what it looks like now. So R2 currently permits single-family or two-family duplex homes. R3 allows for single-family, two-family, or multifamily, which is 3 or more homes. So this is just in one building. GA allows for single-family homes. Additionally, if the property is used for farming, owners can build additional dwellings on the property, such as a single-family home, duplex, and secondary dwellings. These units are already permissible under zoning permits, provided the occupants are family members or farm workers. In practice, farm properties in GA district already have the potential to include an ADU as part of an active farm operation. For instance, a farm family could construct 2 duplexes on one parcel, resulting in 4 separate dwelling units. These units are approved through zoning permits and adhere to the same standards as regular homes. Under the new proposed changes, an ADU could only be added to a property with a single-family home. They cannot be added to a duplex or a multifamily dwelling that already exists. This means a single-family dwelling with an ADU would equate to 2 dwellings units per lot. In essence, the proposed ADU amendments would not increase the allowable density per lot beyond existing regulations. The primary distinction with ADUs is that they can permit 2 separate, not attached homes on a single property, a larger primary dwelling and a smaller secondary dwelling. The proposed ADU standards include clear size limitations, ensuring that ADUs remain secondary to the primary dwelling and don't exceed 1,200 square feet. In contrast, current zoning regulations do not impose size restrictions on additional dwellings added to single-family homes, so attached ones, potentially allowing them to be larger than the original home. While I understand concerns about density and traffic and rural character, it's important to recognize that our current regulations already accommodate potentially larger and more impactful housing developments. Duplexes and multifamily homes, which can lead to higher density, are already permissible under county zoning rules. And that is that.
I just want to make sure that so this is really helpful. Thanks for putting the time and thanks for everybody who came. I want to do whatever we can to make sure that whatever discussion there is at the board meeting is informative and to the point kind of. And you made some really good points that are written. Is there I wonder if the committee thinks there's any benefit to having any of that. I mean, I guess having you prepared to provide those same answers if needed at the meeting would be helpful. Is there any reason for the committee to think that having any of that as a handout for people or whatever makes any sense, or does that just overkill? Any thoughts? I think we're okay as long as we're prepared to, in a thoughtful way, respond. I want to make sure that we give people a thoughtful and accurate response and don't leave them scratching their heads. Okay. Thank you everyone for your thoughtfulness on this. And with that, we will move on if no objections. So this next item,
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, could I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
You answering the questions like that really focused it.
Yep.
It was a really good thing. I should have said this a little earlier.
Yep.
But so that helped go through the whole thing without going through the whole thing. So good job with that. And thanks for suggesting she do that, Tom.
Yeah, I know you just have lots of time to sit around the office, like writing these things up and thoughtfully, but
I love answering questions and I always want people to feel like they fully understand. So definitely never a hassle
Okay.
or a bother.
Terrific. Uh, Item 7B, if we can move on to that. So the last meeting, we reviewed the initial draft of the proposed agreement with regional planning. And Ann was going to have a meeting to sort of review that. And I think the idea was to try and come up with a sort of an understanding that we could move forward on. There was some initial thought that that agreement needed to be approved by the board. Turns out that it doesn't. It's a sort of an administrative process that the department can do. But I thought it would be good to, so it was taken off the agenda. But I thought it would be good for us to at least review review it. So since we reviewed it once before, and see whether there are any changes or Ann's thoughts about how she wants to implement it. So if we could do that briefly, that would be great.
Would you like me to just kind of
Yeah,
point out
could you?
some of the changes? So one of the things, you know, from the feedback we had with PR&D and just with my staff, I kind of asked essentially, we would like to take a larger role in some of this community outreach, and we'd also like to take a larger role with the farmland preservation plan. I feel like our staff is prepared to take those things on in a larger capacity than what they were kind of proposing. So we did address that in here. Also, we kind of just understood that it's better if we go overboard a little bit on this. And, if we're able to do some things, we end up kind of reeling it back rather than the other way around where we end up adding things later. I wanted to make sure that it was really clear who had what role, because I think that was something we ran into with previous changes to the comprehensive plan where the contracted services were doing one thing, we were doing one thing, but there wasn't always a fairly clear who is doing what and who's responsible for what and what that timeline actually is. So I think this addresses that really well. And yeah, I guess if there's any questions, I don't have anything else to add on that.
So did you make any changes to the agreement could you kind of highlight those?
I guess I did not highlight them. Let me see. Okay, one of the other ones was, I can't remember who it was that brought it up, but someone brought up that, what is our final product going to be? And it will be a PDF, but again, it's still editable. I think that if we were ever to make changes to the comprehensive plan in the future, say, update it in a few years or something like that, we would add that as like an addendum or an extra page rather than taking that complete document and redoing it. So I also want to respect the work that's done by a contracted service. Their name is on there. So if we go back and make changes, it's still their name on there, not ours. So we want to make sure it's clear who is providing this product. So we discussed that. But there was also talk about the final future land use map, the preferred land use layer. I requested that we get a GIS shapefile of that so that we can use that on like our beacon mapping and things like that. It'd be helpful for me when creating maps for rezone requests and essentially everything our office does. So they agreed with that. It's under 2B, I believe. So that was added in. And then C, just right under that, that's where it kind of talks about the farmland preservation plan and adding that in. Let's see. That I believe is all of the changes that were made.
Could you review the section that deals with surveying? I don't have it in front of me.
I'm not seeing it either here. Do you see it, Tom? Surveying? Oh, like public,
Yeah, public survey.
polls.
Polls,
that
yeah.
kind of- Okay, I was thinking like Tom surveying. I was like, oh,
Oh,
I hope
no,
they're
yeah.
doing any of that.
Yeah, sorry
Um,
about that.
Oh, it's okay. Just I'm not seeing any,
Community survey, they were,
there we go. That's in the original document, attachment A.
so I think, I thought Gene at our last meeting, I think it was Eugene, brought up the thing that your town is in the process of redoing your comprehensive plan, and you're gonna be doing some community surveys. And that it might be helpful to sort of build in potentially some sharing of that with, or some, maybe even offer the survey to the towns. I'm not sure how that would work, but is there some way that if we do a survey that we can make that of most use to the towns and villages that may also be doing surveys? And that may just be something that we can do without.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, we don't want to hoard our information
Right.
or anything like that. I do believe that that is part of that outreach portion of the plan where we're working with the communities to get what their plans for future development and things are. So we would be showing them those results at that time. They'd be part of these surveys. We would most likely try to get their assistance in getting the word out about these surveys too. So the towns at the town level, getting them to share that maybe on their town website or bring it up at a town board meeting or whatever they think so that we can get more people to participate in the survey because the more data we have, the more useful that's going to be. So I think it's definitely something important to remember. And we can certainly involve the towns even more than they're kind of spelling out here.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of an overall picture. I'm trying to figure out the process we've been looking at for a while. So at first with the comp plan, we were thinking about doing it in-house completely or almost completely. And then we talked about having some help. And now they're going to do most of it except for the things that you were talking about there. Is that correct?
I would say we are going to be pretty heavily involved in this. And that was part of the discussion with them as well, is that, we're looking at this as these are things that they already have systems to do in place. And it's more efficient if we go with some of the things like having them do these surveys that they already have pre-written, the questions that are already working for them, their format essentially. I would say that from how I've interpreted it, that our staff is still very heavily involved, just not at that level of it's just in-house working on it. An evaluation of what our staff is doing and what their job duties are and what their capabilities are as far as working on the comprehensive plan was a big driver in this. Wintertime, we got a little more time to do things like this. However, when the summer hits, it's permits, 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 and it would halt the comprehensive plan work. So as soon as April hits in construction season, my staff is very limited on how much they can work on this. So that was what drove that decision to get WCW RPC more involved. So I want to make sure that, my staff and as well as this committee understand that we will still be very involved in this, but we have to understand that we have some limits.
As follow-up, well, I think it's a good idea, first off. So when wintertime comes and you have more time, will you be able, you've talked about redoing the zoning ordinance multiple times, and maybe other ordinances too. Will that give you more time then to do some of that concurrently with the comp plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I feel like, we always look at the comprehensive plan as kind of that roadmap of how we want our ordinances to read. I mean, I feel like Jean brought up a good point, they're redoing their comprehensive plan right now, and it might not totally match what our zoning ordinance looks like. So that's why we need to both update our comprehensive plans, and work together to make sure they're going with zoning. So I think this would be a good reason for us to reevaluate the zoning ordinance. And there's no reason we can't just start doing it at the same time. I'll say that I think my staff has done a really good job of noting discrepancies in the ordinance or noting, this doesn't make sense to me. Can we get some more clarity here? Or, what was the intent behind this rule? So we found a lot of things like that. So I think we have a good jump start. We still need to finish up our rewriting of the shoreline zoning ordinance. I think that'll be the first one that we finish up here. But yeah, I think this would definitely be a good catalyst for changing that zoning ordinance. And
I know Supervisor Morehouse has frequently told us, rightfully so, that we need to look a little further ahead rather than just working. So it's kind of nice to think, okay, this year, next year, just where these things are going to fit and when we think they should be done. I hadn't thought about it. Maybe even a 2-3 year plan might be kind of nice, and we can look ahead. But you have kept us informed of the shoreland. Yeah, I remember that now too. So just something to think about. So thank you.
Okay. That's all on that. Then we'll move on to the next item, which is item 8A, review of the legislative agenda. Chase has been good enough to take time out of his life to spend thinking about this. So I'll let him kind of.
Okay, so in your meeting packet was included the legislative agenda that we've discussed and you have approved and forwarded on to county board for the last, well, at least that I can recall in my 3 years here. It's been relatively the same. A few things have been added in the last year, but there's still many of these topics are still very relevant in a lot of ways. Some maybe we want to, with Heather being present to talk about item F, but I guess the item H is something that was not in your packet, but I did include a Senate bill in the packet that was not, it was approved by the Senate but failed in the Assembly regarding the state's well compensation program. So I guess if you want to take these line by line, when we get to H, I can give more context around that. And then may have some other, another potential topic for discussion as well. But I guess at your discretion, if you want me to just run through them
Yep.
line by line. Okay. So the first one, support establishment of a Wisconsin Legacy Fund to support core conservation and environmental programs and practices. So this is a long-standing conversation with the State Association of Wisconsin Land and Water, trying to look for alternatives to funding conservation in the state instead of relying on the current system, a system that typically is, like many, is underfunded, lacks support. So this is the terms Wisconsin Legacy Fund stems from what Minnesota did as a legacy fund several years ago. And I think it's just more of supporting that concept of something alternative. It doesn't necessarily have to be coined that, but so that's letter A. Letter B, request full funding for all local land conservation staff according to the formula obtained in chapter 92.146B of Wisconsin statutes. So this is something that when chapter 92 was written, it says shall attempt to fund local land conservation departments for a minimum of 3 positions, the first position being funded at 100%, the second position being funded at 70%, and the third and any subsequent positions being funded at 50% of what their value is. It's my understanding, because this predates my employment in this system over the last 16 years, that, and certainly in my career, it has never been fully funded, that formula. So that puts more pressure on local governments, local municipalities, particularly the counties, to make up that shortfall if they choose to support that type of work in their community. So this would be, again, something that our State Association of Wisconsin Land and Water has consistently been lobbying on, budgeting, requesting budget adjustments for within the state budget. And it always seems to come up short in some way, despite the momentum. So I still think it's a valid request and something to consider. Item C, update state livestock sighting regulations and procedures. So ACTP 51 to provide local governments with meaningful permitting, siting, and regulatory authority over very large CAFO or concentrated animal feeding operations that have significant impact on local environment and land use concerns. This is a topic that is as relevant today as it has been for a number of years. Currently, the state's ACTP 51 limits the ability of local input. It's created a more uniform standard that farms and landowners pursuing livestock expansions have some expectation rather than potentially differing regulations from county to county or town to town, that sort of thing. So that does provide certainly a number of concerns that we hear about frequently, where a farm might be expanding in a local area. There's examples here in Dunn County, and you may hear of a recent one on near our border in Pierce County, where there is limited say by local towns or the county. Currently, if you are in county zoning as a town here in Dunn County, you have adopted this livestock sighting regulations, which are then implemented. But even then, those requirements must allow for farms of any size within those within those municipalities. So there has to be a space created for that. And other thoughts on this are trying to regain some more local control on some of that. Item D, support increased farmer assistance by providing increased funding to farmers for conservation, including funding for managed grazing initiatives and producer-led watershed efforts. This comes and goes with priority from budget year to budget year. The Producer-Led Watershed Group program has seen some increases in its funding and support over the last few budget cycles, but with the demand and the interest in those programs, it's always limiting as to how much funds are available, and then the number of groups that may be able to form or start within the state. So I think this is a reasonable request as well. The managed grazing side of it, we're hearing more about that locally. You'll probably hear more about that locally in the months and years to come. Grazing is kind of has ebbs and flows over generations, but it is taking a little bit, gaining some momentum, I guess I should say, with its impact on land use, its impact on water quality, its impact on local economies. So I think there's certainly a consideration for increasing support for that type of activity. Item E is support for allowing efficient access to data and local input of land spreading of human septage, municipal waste, and industrial waste. This has been a long-standing concern here in Dunn County and across the state. And there still seems to be roadblocks and barriers for staff such as myself and our department to gain access to where some of these wastes are being land applied. Public records requests can gain that, but it's not very efficient and timely. Item F, support for counties to retain a larger portion of the real estate transfer fee. Recommend 50% of fee retained for the local county. Heather, if you want to just comment on that one.
Sure. So there was proposed legislation that failed. This was, to look at the um, let's see, changing the fee from, or the split with the state from 80%, it's 80-20 right now. The state receives 80% of the transfer fee share and the county retains 20. So this was to increase our share to 50%. And it all started, I think, with the county board resolution that circulated, and other counties had definitely shown interest in receiving 50-50 split of this. But again, the proposed legislation, it failed. It had changed. There was changes that were made throughout the process, and it failed. It's certainly up to you. We can leave this here in the case that this would come about again, or I can certainly just keep you informed if I do see anything, and we can address it at that time. So I guess it's up to you.
Thanks, Heather. Item G on here is recommend revising Chapter 33 of Wisconsin statutes to allow for absentee voting as a part of the annual meeting or a special meeting of a lake district. So you'll recall when the Tanner Lake Rehabilitation District was in its formation, this was a concern where members or voting members of that lake district need to be in person at the annual meeting or any special meeting for their votes to count. And to my understanding, there has been no action or anything gained in this realm of Chapter 33. So, and then letter H, like I mentioned before, this was not on this list when it went out in the packet, but I did provide in the packet Senate Bill 58. Senate Bill 58 was a approved through the Senate modification to Chapter 281 of Wisconsin statutes for the Department of Natural Resources Well Compensation Program. So right now, if you are a private well owner and you have a nitrate contamination within your private well, you potentially are eligible to receive some compensation to provide treatment, drill a new well, in some way to address the nitrate concentration concerns. Current law eligibility requires that that water supply from that private well must also supply water to livestock. It must have a nitrate concentration of 40 parts per million or higher, and you must have an annual household income not to exceed $65,000. So while this program has been in existence for many years, and it does get some use, the limitations, the eligibility is severely limits people's access to this, especially when you think about at one point in time, there was a farm on most private wells supply some sort of livestock, and that necessarily isn't the case anymore. In the past year, a little over a year now, a year and a half, the Governor Evers, through the use of ARPA funds, supplied, put more money into this program, and through that process, adjusted the eligibility requirements, lowered the eligibility for income. I believe it was, increased the income to, I believe, $100,000, lowered the nitrate concentration down to 10, and then also removed the livestock requirement. That program, and we have several citizens within Dunn County that participated in this in some way, was quite successful in, at this point in time, in just over a year, about $10 million has been spent in the state of those ARPA funds to assist landowners in this. Senate Bill 58, which was included in the packet, was an attempt to adjust the eligibility requirements for this program. And it's my understanding, not exactly sure why it did not pass the assembly, other than potentially some procedure things and also likely funding for it. I think I'm proposing this for you to consider in supporting the changes in the eligibility for the program, similar to what was used for the ARPA funds. So lowering that nitrate concentration, removing the livestock requirement, making adjustments to the annual household income. And then also, you'll see on in the red font, text here, allowing this to go beyond just private well owners. This was not something that was done through the ARPA funds, but I think it's something that should be considered, and there is some support for this around the state to include transient non-community wells and non-transient non-community wells. So those are wells that provide water to transient citizens or public or the general public, such as rural churches, taverns, campgrounds, things like that. Currently, those entities are not eligible for well compensation through the current law. So potentially at no fault of their own, they're subject to having requirements of providing safe water in some fashion, whether that's drilling new wells, treatment, or an alternative water source. So letter H basically says recommend changes to the state's well compensation grant program eligibility requirements to allow more access to the program's funds by private well owners, transient non-community wells, and non-transient non-community wells. Certainly we can adjust the verbiage on that, but that's my first attempt. And I also would say that funding for this program ebbs and flows with each state budget cycle as it currently sits, depending on its use. And I don't know that, I think that's part of the hang up is always funding. So I don't know that requesting more funding for the program is the primary goal, other than I think the priority right now would be to adjust the eligibility. Yeah. With that, there's one other potential consideration that I do not have drafted here, but would be in regards to a recent federal Supreme Court decision known as a Chevron deference, which basically said it overturned a rule, and now it's always been the understanding and the practice that Congress, state legislature create laws. They're handed down to agencies to create rulemaking around that for implementation, so to interpret the law and implement the rule. And that's typically done with the understanding that the staff and individuals within the agencies have the expertise to develop those rules. And through this change in Supreme Court, it likely removes that process and creates the interpretation of the law to many people's agreement, and there's some valid concern there that Congress or the state legislature should be making those decisions and not agency staff. I think the concern that we may have locally, and this is for you to consider, is if we are basically at the mercy of what a decision is to be made, whether that's a court challenge, or we can't turn to our agency partners and look for guidance or anything on a matter that's here locally. Many of these things, I think, it's anticipated could be tied up in court cases, and which kind of leaves us in limbo and not having good guidance or direction from what we've relied on for many years, experts within these agencies to provide us guidance. So I just offer that as a suggestion or as a recommendation or something for consideration. And I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Tom, for all of this.
Thanks.
Chairman, may I just say, there is another element in the legislative plan that Health and Human Services and PR&D share. It's the very last one on the list about groundwater monitoring.
Could you,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
gonna ask that question too, so.
Yeah, it's number 8. Advocate for a statewide groundwater assessment and monitoring initiative. Additionally, fund mitigation of problems that are identified in groundwater quality and secure funding for long-term private drinking water protection monitoring. It should have an A in there. Monitoring and remediation program. And both of us had that plank in our legislative agenda, and it made sense to pull it out and combine the two.
And I guess I would offer that the well compensation program could be a consideration for a joint one as well.
That's true. We could look at that again. Yeah.
Yeah. Heather, go ahead.
Yep. Number 3 is in combination with the Committee on Admin and PRND, and this was to, support an increase in funding to the Wisconsin Land Information Program. And the discussion was raising recording fees to help fund this program. I mean, currently we do fund the program, but it was to raise recording fees. So that did fail in the legislation, but I do feel that will be coming forward again. So I don't know how that looks. There could be other funding mechanisms, but because the recording fees are down the last couple of years, that means less money available for land information projects.
Um, Go back to ours. I'm glad you reminded us about the well test monitoring program, because I was going to bring that up. Any questions or comments about what's up there now? Are any of those that are no longer relevant in the committee's view, or not of enough relevance to warrant being listed on here? I wish that Supervisor Bjork was here, because I know he is, you know, and in particular, I know that he is concerned about item C up there, and has raised it several times as that his concern is that the committee is somewhat ingenuous in our support for local control here, but not local control for example, MOUs or ADUs. But I think that Chase explained more that, this is kind of this is a broad topic, but I think is something that we should leave in there, because it continues to be of relevance to local governments around the state. And there are examples in our area where local governments have, I think, tried to or wanted to exercise some reasonable input into the permitting process, and have been refused, in some cases sued for trying to do that. So, but that's an ongoing conversation between the larger community and between Supervisor Brooke and I. So,
Mr. Chairman?
yeah,
I don't see, I mean, the needs continue, so I don't see any particular reason for removing any of these. And I am supportive of Chase's addition of letter H. On the Chevron decision, I mean, that's one of those, throw your hands up and say, well, what do we do now? I don't know, what would we do? What would we potentially recommend? I mean, H is great, so what about G?
Yeah, that's partly why I didn't necessarily include a suggestion on here. It's come up in a couple of meetings that I've been part
Okay.
of. It's come up in our Dunn County Alliance of Dunn County Conservation and Sports Clubs. It's come up in our Health Done Right Heat Action,
Yeah.
Healthy Environment Action Team. Yeah, I just felt it was, since it's being discussed locally, I'll bring it here, but
Yeah,
pretty
and thank you
simple.
for bringing it up.
We simply demand the Supreme Court reverse its decision.
Yes, that's an excellent suggestion, but
Do we want to try and write something on that, or is that for now just beyond our scope?
I mean, if you think that there's something that the legislature conceivably could do about this, or would be willing to do about it.
there was a 2018 ruling within the state of Wisconsin that did something very similar, regarding Department of Natural Resources and, so I'm not sure if this current situation makes that situation any better either. So,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, I don't necessarily have a suggestion other than
Yeah.
to make awareness of
I
it.
think it's something we put on our watch list and see how it emerges. I mean, it may be an issue that is relevant to, it would be relevant to every county in the state if
Absolutely.
if it becomes a problem.
Yes, it will.
Thanks for bringing it up too, though. Anything else? If not, I think probably would make sense to have a motion to approve this as our legislative agenda.
I would certainly move approval.
Supervisor
Mr. Chair.
Moore moves. Is there a second? Various seconds.
I just have one comment for discussion.
Hmm?
I just have one comment on discussion. If the joint, number 8,
All right.
Health and Human Services and Planning, Resource and Development, I guess if Health and Human Services chooses to adopt the well comp program suggestions as well, then maybe that would end up being moved to number 8. But for now, we'll leave it under PRND.
Yeah, leave it there and I'll bring it to
Okay.
Health and Human Services Board.
Okay. That sounds good. Given that, all in favor of adopting the legislative agenda, say aye. Opposed, say no. We've adopted it. Let's see. Any announcements? So hopefully Supervisor Bjork we can deal with the technical issues and get him back at least on screen for the next few meetings. And he continues his recovery. I guess our next meeting is August 7th. Is that still okay with people? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, staff, for good work.